That was 16 years ago this hour. It's easy to forget how it all happened, but we will never forget what happened.
And we've had two presidents since then, President Obama for 8 years. This will be the first time we see our president, a New Yorker by birth, who lived through this, as we all did in Midtown Manhattan, and he'll come out and offer his moment of silence with the First Lady.
He and the First Lady, yes, will also be at the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial, where they will remember all of the victims, leading that moment of silence. You're looking live at the White House right now.
And at some point later today, we'll get all the names of those who lost their lives, 2,996.
The President and the First Lady should come out of the South Portico in the next few seconds to mark 8:46, 16 years ago, when American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower. This will be the first of 6 moments of silence. After we observe the moment of silence, we will take you to Ground Zero for the traditional reading of the names.
Adelamero Abad.
Marie Rose Abad.
Andrew Anthony Abate.
Vincent Paul Abate.
Lawrence Christopher Abel.
Alana Abraham.
William F. Abramson.
Richard Anthony Aceto.
Heinrich Bernard Ackerman.
Paul Aquaviva.
Christian Adams.
Donald Leroy Adams.
Patrick Adams.
Shannon Lewis Adams.
Stephen George Adams.
Ignatius Udo Adanga.
Christy A. Adamo.
Terrence Edward Adderley Jr.
Sophia B. Addo,
Lee Adler,
Daniel Thomas Aflito,
Emmanuel Akwazi Afwakwa,
Alak Agrawal,
Mukul Kumar Agarwala,
Joseph Agnello,
David Scott Agnes,
Joao Alberto da Fresca Aguilera Jr.,
Brian G. Ahern,
Jeremiah Joseph Ahern,
Joanne Marie Adeolas,
Shabir Ahmed,
Terrence Andre Aiken,
Godwin O. Ajala,
Trudy Alagero,
Andrew Alamino,
Margaret Ann Alario,
Gary M. Abero,
John Leslie Albert,
Peter Craig Alderman,
and my uncle, Charles William Garbarini.
my brother-in-law, Sal Edward Terry Jr., may you rest in peace. Your sister Faith still misses you to this date. You've been a guiding light and a hero always to this date. Thank you very much.
Jacqueline Delane Aldridge Frederick,
David D. Alger,
Ernest Ali Kakos,
Edward L. Allegretto,
Eric Allen,
Joseph Ryan Allen,
Richard Dennis Allen,
Richard L. Allen,
Christopher E. Allingham,
Anna S. W. Allison,
Janet Marie Alonso,
Anthony Alvarado,
Antonio Javier Alvarez,
Victoria Alvarez Brito,
Telmo E. Alvear,
Cesar Amaranto Alviar,
Tariq Amanula,
Angelo Amaranto,
James M. Amato,
Joseph Amatuccio,
Paul W. Ambrose,
Christopher Charles Amoroso,
Craig Scott Amundsen,
Kazuhiro Anai,
Calixto Anaya Jr.,
Joseph P. Anchundia,
Kermit Charles Anderson,
Yvette Constance Anderson,
John Jack Andriacchio,
Michael Rourke Andrews,
Jean Ann Andrucki,
Sue Nia Ang,
Joseph Angelini Sr.,
Joseph John Angelini Jr.,
David Lawrence Angel,
Mary Lynn Edwards Angel,
Laura Angeletta,
Doreen J. Angersani,
Lorraine Antigua,
Sama David Aoyama,
and my father, Kevin James Murphy. I love you very much, Dad, and I know you're looking down at me with a big, big smile on your face today. I love you.
and my uncle and my hero, New York City firefighter and United States Marine, Matthew David Garvey. We love and miss you, Uncle Matt.
Peter Paul Apollo,
Faustino Apostol Jr.,
Frank Thomas Aquilino,
Patrick Michael Anyos,
David Gregory Arache,
Michael George Arjinsky,
Louis Arena,
Barbara Jean Arstegui,
Adam P. Arrayas,
Michael J. Armstrong,
Jack Charles Aaron,
Joshua Todd Aaron,
Richard Avery Arano,
Myra Joy Aronson,
Japhet Jesse Arie,
Carl Francis Asaro,
Michael A. Asiak,
Michael Edward Asher,
Janice Marie Ashley,
Thomas J. Ashton,
Manuel O. Asentimbe,
Greg A. Atlas,
Gerald Thomas Atwood,
James Otterfred,
Louis F. Aversano Jr.,
Ezra Avidas,
Sandy Ayala,
Arlene T. Babiquitas,
Eustace R. Backus,
John J. Badagliaca,
Jane Ellen Basler,
Robert J. Bearwalter,
Andrew J. Bailey,
Greg T. Bailey,
Garnet Ace Bailey,
Tatiana Bakalinskaya,
Michael S. Bashk,
Sharon M. Malcolm,
Michael Andrew Bain,
Catherine Bantis,
and my brother, Joseph Michael Giacconi.
and
His
my
family, his friends will never forget. I come here every year for 16 years to make sure I hear his name so that I can honor him and make sure that he will never be forgotten.
and my grandfather Howard Selwyn.
Gerard Batiste,
Walter Barron,
Gerard A. Barbera,
Paul Vincent Barbaro,
James William Barbella,
Victor Daniel Barbosa,
Christine Joanna Barbuda,
Colleen Ann Barco,
David Michael Barclay,
Matthew Barnes,
Melissa Rose Barnes,
Sheila Patricia Barnes,
Evan J. Barone,
Renee Barrett Arjun,
Arthur Thaddeus Barry,
Diane G. Barry,
Maurice Vincent Barry,
Scott D. Bart,
Carlton W. Bartels,
Guy Barsby,
Ina B. Basina,
Alicia Christine Burton Bajmajan,
Kenneth William Basnicki,
Stephen Joseph Bates,
Paul James Battaglia,
W. David Bauer,
Ivan Louis Caprio Batusta,
Marlon Capito Bautista,
Mark Lawrence Bevis,
Jasper Baxter,
Lorraine B. G. Bay,
Michelle Beal,
Todd M. Beamer,
Paul Frederick Bettini,
Jane S. Beatty,
Alan Anthony Beaven,
Lawrence Ira Beck,
Minette Marie Beckles,
Carl John Bedigian,
Michael Ernest Beekman,
Kevin Joseph Smith,
and my brother, Kevin Patrick York. We will always remember your enduring devotion to family, your unyielding support for your network of friends, your compassion for others that led to your generosity, your animated debates fueled by new knowledge, your wit and humor that helped lighten any mood, and finally, your affection for America and your passion for history. Continue to guide us with your energetic spirit. May God bless you.
and my oldest son, Noel, who was in the second tower. I miss you every day. We all miss you. And thank you for your prayers to help us get by. Thank you.
Maria A. Bear,
Max J. Bilkey,
Yelena Bililovsky,
Nina Patrice Bell,
Debbie S. Bellows,
Stephen Elliott Belson,
Paul M. Benedetti,
Denise Lenore Benedetto,
Brian Craig Bennett,
Eric L. Bennett,
Oliver Bennett,
Margaret L. Benson,
Dominic J. Berardi,
James Patrick Berger,
Stephen Howard Berger,
John P. Bergen,
Alvin Bergson,
Daniel David Bergstein,
Graham Andrew Berkeley,
Michael J. Berkeley,
Donna M. Bernards,
David W. Bernard,
William H. Bernstein,
David M. Beret,
David Shelby Berry,
Joseph John Berry,
William Reed Bethke,
Yanene Bitru,
Timothy D. Betterly,
Carolyn Mayer Bug,
Edward Frank Bea,
Paul Michael Bayer,
Anil Taliram Bahavarni,
Bella J. Buchan,
Shimi D. Biegeleisen,
Peter Alexander Bielfeld,
William G. Biggert,
Ryan Eugene.
We will never forget the day that changed America forever, 16 years ago today. The terrorist attack took nearly 3,000 souls when hijacked planes slammed into the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We are moments away from those bells tolling for the moment a second plane struck the South Tower of the World Trade Center. As we listen to family members, as they've done every year since, read the names of those who were lost one by one. Good morning. I'm Shannon Bream, live in America's Newsroom.
And I'm John Scott. There is little question that this day changed every single one of us. The numbers are still staggering all these years later. The thousands of lives lost. This is the first year that President Trump, a native New Yorker, observes today's ceremonies as president. But first, Bill Hemmer joins us from Orlando as Irma continues to batter the Sunshine State with devastating winds, tornadoes, and flooding. Bill.
Hey, John, Shannon, good morning to you. More than 3 million in Florida waking up today without power. It was 24 hours ago where this Category 4 storm came on shore in Key West. Now reduced 24 hours later to a tropical storm. It is still a big story and will be throughout the day, but it is also a moment where we pause and we reflect, a significant time for reflection for all of us across the country and frankly around the world today. On this September 11th, it is that day yet again, 9/11. So we'll see you a bit later here this morning in Florida. John, Shannon, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. He's going to join us later for more extended coverage of the storm. But first, a moment of silence will be held any minute to mark the moment United Airlines Flight 175 was flown into the South Tower. President Trump and First Lady Melania will soon arrive at the Pentagon for the observance ceremony there, which the president is going to deliver remarks, we understand, there. Vice President Mike Pence will take part in ceremonies at the Flight 93 Memorial near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where one of the airliners crashed after passengers and crew fought back, trying to take control away from the terrorists who'd hijacked it, and were trying to head that plane, we believe, for the heart of Washington, D.C.
And as bad as that day was, Shannon, it continues to take its toll. Just about 10 days or so ago, the fire department of the city of New York added something like 32 names to the list of firefighters whose lives were claimed by the events of 9/11. Many of them were working the rescue effort on what they called the pile, breathing in noxious fumes and poisonous chemicals, which ultimately claimed their lives.
Yeah, we have a family friend who was an NYPD officer that day and still suffers and fights those health problems that he says he would never trade the time he was down there. It was important. Let's listen in now for the moment of silence.
I'm not so sure anymore. I'm thinking that here with your family is the best place. Like last year when your son Gregory graduated college, you should have been here in the best place, watching him get his diploma. And then a month later when your daughter Amanda got married, you should have been here in the best place, walking her down the aisle. And then just 6 months after that, when your other daughter Jessica got married, you should have been here in the best place, walking her down the aisle. Are you in a better place, Jeff? I really hope so, but again, I'm just not so sure anymore. I guess I'll know in 20 or 30 years, so save me a good seat, little brother. We love you. We miss you every day.
Richard Edward Bosco, and my father, Ronald Carl Fazio. Dad, your youngest granddaughter is here today. Reese, you're proudly named after your dad. He had a heart condition, and he loved his Reese's peanut butter cups, and that never stopped him. If he were here today, he would tell you to hold the door for others every chance that you get. Love, strength, and peace to everyone near and far. 143.
Klaus Botha.
Carol.
A somber day in this city, in this nation, as we remember the victims of the 9/11 attacks 16 years ago today. Eric Shawn is in Lower Manhattan, live near the memorial where these services are taking place. Eric?
Good morning, John. It has been 16 years, but it is as if not one day has gone by. We are again looking at the gathering of the loved ones, the officials, family members, relatives, and friends who, in a very personal way, are remembering those who were lost on this day 16 years ago. As you said, it is a very somber, solemn, and emotional ceremony, still filled with the pain of all that was lost. The names are being read of the 2,753 people who died. We've heard the very personal tributes from the sons and the daughters and the brothers to those who were killed in the World Trade Center towers. There will be, as always, 4 moments of silence. We've already had 2. Tomorrow, when both planes hit Tower 1 and Tower 2, as well as later this morning when both towers fell. Let's take a moment to observe the first moment of silence that happened a few moments ago at 8:46 this morning. It is a very real remembrance of what happened here, as well as the continuing threat of radical Islamic terrorism that attacked our nation and brought these towers down, striking at the very heart of the American spirit. Earlier this morning, we interviewed the New York City Police Commissioner James O'Neill, who says, yes, the city is safer because of the precautions that have been taken because of this day. And what happened is a reminder to us every day.
And it just brings you right back to September 11, 2001, and just how it changed the world. It changed the city, it changed the nation, but it changed the world. And today's important for a number of reasons. It's important for everybody to remember. It's also a reminder for us that we have to continue to be vigilant.
And with the attacks that we've seen around the world and the attempts, 22 terrorist attempts and plots that have been broken up here in New York City since 2001, it is a reminder not only of what we lost on this day 16 years ago, but also of the threat that still exists. John?
And sad to say, Eric, many of the families of victims of this attack have still not really had the satisfaction of a burial. They are still identifying the remains of the victims.
Yeah, that's true. An astounding 40% still have not been identified, but that effort to identify them has continued. In fact, just last month, the latest victim, a male who, because of his family privacy, decided not to be named publicly, he was identified. We went to the medical examiner's office here in New York City, which is continuing new DNA analysis of these remains that they find. We talked with Dr. Mark Desire, who is the assistant director in charge of the office, who described the DNA work that is so important and continues on a very special mission.
As a forensic scientist, you're trained to be impartial and unbiased, not become emotionally or personally involved. With World Trade Center, I actually bring the scientists that work on the remains to meet the families and to show the scientists that the families, they support us and they still want us to continue with this kind of work.
Yeah, they are doing very special and important work over there. And then, of course, there are all those who have been sickened and died. The World Trade Health Center program has registered 37,000 first responders, volunteers, and others. They've suffered from cancers, various diseases. There's a marvelous program. 1,000 or so first responders and others so far have died from the effects of the toxic fumes and the dust here in the World Trade Center back on September 11th. That is a very special effort, John, that continues.
It is a day that will always be seared into our memories. Tell us about your recollections from that day, Eric.
Yeah, we were on the air together, as you recall, John. I was walking to work here at Fox News when the first plane, the American Airlines plane flown by Mohammed Atta, flew over my head. He was very low. It was very loud on Fifth Avenue when I looked up, and he was crabbing kind of to the right as he made a right turn, heading right toward the World Trade Center, and we went on the air together that morning. What has made me so angry as a New Yorker, as an American all these years, is that this was not the first radical Islamic terrorist attack on our country. The first was November 5th, 1990, the assassination of Meir Kahane by El Sayed Nosair. Then there was the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, and sadly to say, it is something that we still face today and will continue to do so. John.
Eric Sean reporting from the ceremonies underway right now in Lower Manhattan. Ceremonies also underway at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon in Washington, where you're originally from.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. Over the weekend, then Governor Pataki was talking about what he saw that day. And I know that you were on the air for hours, moment by moment, as we were getting the realization of exactly what was happening, the reality of it. And Governor Pataki said he had two feelings that still stay with him. Number one, absolute horror at what he saw. But he said also the tremendous pride in the way that the people acted in the face of this unspeakable evil, being down there and seeing the first responders working for hours and days at a time. And what hope and faith that gave him in America, kind of two sides of the coin, just like we've seen in Houston recently as well.
I grew up out west, always thought of, you know, New York as sort of this cold, hard city. And on that particular day, New Yorkers really reached out to one another and helped one another, lifted each other up, offered anybody, total strangers, whatever help they could.
I mean,
it was an amazing day.
You were actually on the air as the realization was coming that this wasn't some freak accident, that first plane. I mean, I can't imagine how you felt in the chair that day. You were such a strong, steady voice as this was unfolding, and we realized what was really happening.
Well, you know, these days, anything seems possible in the world of terrorism. But back then, you didn't think that somebody would be just heartless enough to fly an airplane full of innocent people into a building. That just didn't come to one's mind. And so when the first plane hit, we thought it was an accident. And I was speaking to an expert, an NTSB expert, who was telling me all the reasons it could be an accident. And then the second plane hit, and you knew this was deliberate.
It was all doubt was erased at that point. Joining us now to talk about his thoughts on that day and moving forward as well, New York Congressman Peter King, member of the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, great to have you with us on this somber morning. Your reflections on that day and where we go from here moving forward.
Well, Shannon, it's a day that none of us ever should forget. It was a horrible day. I lost many friends and neighbors that day, as so many New Yorkers and all Americans did. But it's important that we honor the memory of those who died, that we stay in contact with their families. And just, I hate to say it, but just as importantly, we have to remember this war goes on. We can never let our guard down. We are as much at war with Islamist terrorism now as we were on 9/11. We're much safer, but the threat is greater. They are constantly attempting to find ways to attack us. We cannot let our guard down.
Well, and it's notable this morning, Catherine Herridge, obviously one of our top correspondents out of D.C., notes that the trial date for the 5 remaining 9/11 suspects, they remain at Guantanamo. The trial date keeps sliding, expected now at 2019. It's been hung up on a lot of issues, she says, regarding the original detention of these suspects. You know, that would place this almost 20 years after the events have happened. Are we taking the right course of action with these remaining suspects?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important they be detained. It's important we have the trials. They have to be brought to justice. I think it's gone on for much too long. I think there's been so many delays. So many people seem more interested in what they perceive to be civil liberties and civil rights of those who killed innocent Americans. But we are going to persevere. Those trials will go ahead. And we owe it to those who died. We owe it to their families. And we also have to send a signal to the world that we're not going to be intimidated by political correctness. And we're not going to be intimidated by Islamist terrorism.
How do you think we're doing now in the fight against terrorism moving forward? The threats bubbling out there, constantly morphing and spreading into new frontiers.
Yeah, I mean, back on 9/11, we were talking about one enemy force, Al-Qaeda, in a few caves in Afghanistan. Now it is a worldwide movement. We have Al-Qaeda, in the Arabian Peninsula, we have ISIS, we have Boko Haram. We can go through a whole list of Islamist terrorist groups that have morphed from Al-Qaeda. Having said that, they are on the run. We do keep them on, we have to keep them on defense, and we can't be apologizing. We can't be backing away. I'm not trying to say this in a partisan way, but I think that the Obama administration, too often, we sort of backed away, or we didn't want to, in some ways they were very aggressive, but in others then they were apologetic. We can't be. We have to stay on offense all the time. We have to kill them before they kill us, and we have to realize that there is a threat here within the United States. It's important that organizations like the NYPD and the FBI and other police organizations do monitoring and surveillance, because there is an enemy that lives amongst us, and we can't allow them to get the upper hand.
Yeah, we're constantly on defense, and we know that our law enforcement officers, our intelligence operators, they're working 24/7 in ways that the average American, we don't even know. We can appreciate it and thank them, but we know that they are constantly fighting threats we never know about because they don't come to fruition. But backing this up to the source, how in the world do we go about changing the ideology, the philosophy that drives and motivates these groups to give their lives up?
Yeah, first of all, again, we have to win it on offense. We have to stop them militarily. We have to stop them through intelligence. But as far as changing the mindset, yes, we have to do that. We have to work on it. And we can't do it by being apologetic. We have to find leaders in the Muslim world, people in the Muslim community here in the United States who are willing to stand with us and be very forceful and not be apologetic themselves. So again, this is going to be a long, hard fight, but we do it by standing for American values and showing that that we do stand for a much far superior belief that the views of Islamist terrorism are evil, and that the ones who suffer the most are Muslims themselves. And again, we have to reach out to the solid group of Muslims in this country and around the world who do want to reject Islamist terrorism, but we have to show them that we are going to win, because otherwise they in some ways look for protection. We've seen that in Afghanistan and other countries where people who do not support al-Qaeda or do not support the Taliban or ISIS nevertheless give them some support because they're afraid they're going to be murdered if they don't.
Congressman, it's John Scott. I remember in the weeks and months and maybe year after 9/11, the 9/11 attacks, there was a great coming together of this in this country. We were not Republicans, we were not Democrats, we were Americans. And it seems that in the intervening years, that's fallen by the wayside, and this country is very polarized. How do we go about fixing that?
If anything good did come from 9/11, it was a tremendous unity, and I think I always hope that when we have these memorials, that we honor those who died on 9/11 and recall the attacks, we can get back some of that spirit, realizing how much we have in common, realizing who the enemy is, and not have people trying to undercut the police, the FBI, and others who are fighting against the enemy. So I would say it's important that for those of us who feel strongly about this, to be outspoken, to be out there, and to remind people of how horrible it was on September 11th. And we never thought we'd be divided again, and yet we did become divided. We can't allow that to happen. The enemy is united. We have to be united, and we have to win this, and we have to remember that America has to come first, and that we are, again, the greatest nation. Even if the faults we have, we're so far superior to anybody else. That's what's important to keep in mind.
What one thing would you like to see come out of Washington right now that would ensure that we aren't attacked like that again?
To make sure that the FBI and our local police right here in this country have all the resources they need and their hands are not tied, that they are not, because of political correctness, kept from doing the job that they have to do, and that's to be able to detect and find those within our society, whether it's the Boston Massacre bombers, whether it's others who attempt to destroy us from within, and also to give our military leaders all the power and authority they need to destroy ISIS and al-Qaeda and all those affiliates overseas.
Do you feel there is a shortfall in that regard?
I think that there had been somewhat of a shortfall. I think the president, and again, I'm not trying to be partisan, I think the president and General McMaster, General Kelly, Secretary Mattis, they are doing an outstanding job. And I also know what the police in New York are doing in other areas, Nassau County, Suffolk County, state police, all doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah, New York Police Department has its own anti-terrorism unit, even with officers assigned overseas. It is, again, a somber day. Just take us back to your memories of 9/11, 2001.
Yeah, I was actually in Washington. I was heading to the Capitol, and I heard on the car radio that the tower had been attacked, and not attacked, been hit by a plane. And like you, I thought it was an accident. By the time I got into my office, just then the second plane was hitting. And my immediate worry is my wife. She was on the runway at LaGuardia. She was coming down to Washington that day. There was supposed to be a barbecue at the White House. And I was wondering again, could that have been her plane? Was she there? There was no way of making contact with her. And then my son worked in the Commerce Department, and there was a rumor that a bomb had gone off there. So I was thinking very, very personally for the first half hour. And then after about an hour, when I realized they were safe, then it suddenly hit me. Wait a minute, there's thousands of people in that building. And then all day long, I remember getting calls from friends and family members who knew people, friends of mine, friends of theirs, neighbors who were killed. And it just became one horrific period of days and weeks and months of wakes and funerals, memorial services, and also being in Washington, trying to get our defenses up, making sure that we did all we could be doing. I don't think George Bush has gotten enough credit for the job that he did. If anybody had told us on September 12th, 2001, that we would not be attacked again for all these years, nobody would have believed it. Yeah. So again, this is those are all my memories. Sort of they all come together, they flow together. My immediate one was trying to find out, where my wife was that day.
As you're speaking, we're looking at images from the lower Manhattan memorial service. We've just seen New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio, the former Mayor Mike Bloomberg, also in attendance, Senator Schumer, Governor Cuomo, and another number of other dignitaries. Not trying to leave anybody out. I'm just letting our viewers know who we're seeing. Jenna?
Yeah, and you've seen so many of these family members. Yes, Congressman, you still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I was up there with all of them, and more than all of us politicians, what's important is when you see the family members that are there, the mothers, the fathers, the sons and daughters of those who died on 9/11. It is so moving, and it's so again, it just means so much to see them and to see the anguish they still suffer all these years later.
Yeah, that's been so striking this morning in seeing them read the names and share personal memories of the person that they lost. Congressman, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Very good. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you, John.
All right, of course, as we remember the tragedy here in New York City, there's still a humanitarian crisis unfolding in Florida. Let's check back in with Bill Hemmer. I believe that he is in Orlando tracking Hurricane Irma. Good morning, Bill.
Yeah, Shannon, good morning again. There will be updates throughout the state of Florida throughout that day, and really it's going to change by the hour. We're about 315 miles due north of Key Largo. We're about 140 miles south of Jacksonville, and that gives you a sense of the scale of the story that we're trying to cover today. And Isla Morada, which is the very beginning of the Florida Keys, once you leave South Florida, we're just getting word from the mayor down there that cell service is bad. They have not had a clear check of everything down there. They believe about 25% of the residents who live in the Keys rode this storm out, even though it struck land 24 hours ago as a Cat 4. Still, with a lot of communication still to get established here, there are no reports of injuries in the Florida Keys. Now, granted, it is early. That can change, but that's the early word now from the mayor down in the far southern part of the state of Florida. And the far northeastern part of the state in Jacksonville, we're watching the remnants of what's now Tropical Storm Irma. You can see it on the radar system. And the flooding in Jacksonville is a bit stunning. We saw the water coming off the ocean overnight last night into the early morning hours, and that is the scene in Jacksonville as they're dealing with the storm surge that has come around as these bands have whipped their way up the central spine of Florida as it starts to exit its way out of its state. And this is truly remarkable. You know, Shannon, we started 4 days ago guessing where was the best location. Where do you go? Do you go down to Miami? Do you go down to the Keys? Do you hang out in Tampa or down in Naples? Well, we decided Orlando because the storms seem to be so large and so big and so all-encompassing. And yesterday when we were broadcasting, we watched the radar system cover the entire state. So you could literally throw a dart on the map and find a news story as it relates to Irma, as it relates to Florida right now. I mentioned 3 million without power right now. That's going to change throughout the day. You know, some of the power is shut off intentionally. They don't want to overload the system. In order to get it back online, they have to go slowly and take it step by step. But I would turn our viewers, based on the large scope of geography in Florida here, to a couple of areas. Watch for more news out of Florida Keys. Let's see how Miami Beach recovers after the flooding of yesterday. Let's see what the damage is in Marco Island. Some of the aerials out of there show extensive damage, aluminum siding ripped off of homes and flooding as well. So let's see what happens as a result of now what is the first time that we have seen sun in about 2 days here in Orlando. And then as we move further inland up and around Atlanta, Georgia, for the first time ever, Shannon, you had a tropical storm warning for the city of Atlanta. I mean, that is just unheard of, but that's what we're dealing with right now. And we'll also keep an eye on that coast with Savannah up into Charleston and see what kind of surge they get to. So, but the sun is out for the moment here in Orlando. Still a bit windy, but we think we've we think we've done pretty well, all things considered, if you go back 5 or 6 days earlier, Shannon.
Yeah, I've been doing the bed checks on all my family across the state, and no damage for them, but a lot of folks without power. And so we're glad they're safe. We're glad you're safe, too. So we'll check back in with you in just a little bit, Bill. Thank you.
Well, at the Pentagon, President Trump and First Lady Melania are set to lead a moment of silence, his first 9/11 memorial ceremony as Commander-in-Chief. Kristen Fisher joins us now from the Pentagon Memorial. So what do we expect to hear from the president at the Pentagon today, Kristen?
Well, John, 16 years ago today, President Trump watched the Twin Towers fall from inside Trump Tower in New York City. Last year, he was at Ground Zero as a candidate. This year, he will be remembering all of the lives that were lost there in Pennsylvania and here at the Pentagon as Commander-in-Chief. Now, the plan is for President Trump to arrive here in just a few minutes. He's going to be taking part in a wreath-laying ceremony. Then he's going to observe a moment of silence. Then the speaking portion of this observance is going to take place. It'll start with the General Joe Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then Defense Secretary James Mattis, and then President Trump will speak right in front of the Pentagon, right where this great big American flag was unfurled this morning. That's become a tradition here every year on the anniversary of 9/11. President Trump, he's expected to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. As for what he will say, I would expect him to say something very similar to what he said when he declared today Patriots Day on Friday. He will, of course, remember and honor the 184 lives that were lost here 16 years ago today, but he's also going to pay tribute to the men and women that are continuing to take the fight to terrorists all over the globe. What he said in that statement is, quote, "On this anniversary, I invite all Americans to thank our nation's incredible service members and first responders who are on the front lines of our fight against terrorism. Spirit of service and self-sacrifice that Americans so nobly demonstrated on September 11th, 2001 is evident in the incredible response to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma." So, you know, the message there really clear. The focus, of course, on the 184 lives that were lost here at the Pentagon. You can hear their names being read aloud with the sounding of the bell right behind me. But the focus will also be on remembering all the first responders that responded in the wake of 9/11 and how that spirit can really be felt and seen in the first responders that have saved their neighbors from those floods in Harvey, and all the first responders and law enforcement personnel that will be fanning out across the state of Florida today, John.
They have done amazing work at the Pentagon. They did that day, and they continue to do it. I know Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama both received briefings about the terror threat level every September 11th. Does President Trump intend to continue that tradition? Do we know?
He will. He is going to receive a briefing about the current terror threat environment at some point today at the White House. One of the people that will likely be in that briefing is his Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert. He was asked on Friday about what the current terror threat level is heading into this 9/11 anniversary, and he said that, you know, just because we're having all of these hurricanes taking place, all of these natural disasters going on, that no terrorist should view us as vulnerable right now. That's the farthest thing from the truth. That's what Bossert said. He'll likely be one of the people briefing President Trump today. And just in case we needed any more evidence or one more reminder of the current terror threat taking place, especially in Afghanistan, just this morning, John, 5 U.S. Troops wounded at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, the largest U.S. air base in largest U.S. base in Afghanistan. John.
Yeah, that war launched in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 still continues, the nation's longest war ever. Kristen Fisher at the Pentagon, thank you.
And her husband. And for more on this, let's bring in Michael Waltz, former Green Beret commander, former counterterror advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, author of the book Warrior Diplomat, and a Fox News contributor. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning. Sad day.
It is. And where do you think we are 16 years later in this fight?
You know, I'm glad to see the coverage of the Pentagon ceremony. Just behind that in Arlington National Cemetery is Section 60 of Arlington, where Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are buried. And, you know, this is our nation's longest war, as we've mentioned. Our fathers and grandfathers fought in World War II, in Korea, and Vietnam. But this war on terror, this is my generation's war. And the difference here is that it's still ongoing. It hasn't ended 16 years on, and unfortunately, I think we're just in the beginning stages of it.
Well, the question I was going to ask you, and it's John Scott, Colonel Maltz. I wanted to ask, in the fight against terrorism, do you see the glass as half empty or half full?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. On the one hand, we haven't had another 9/11. We haven't had an attack of this magnitude at least. You know, we've had the other inspired attacks in San Bernardino and others, but we haven't had another 9/11. So in that sense, defensively, it's been a success, and a lot of credit should go to our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement officers for making that happen. Offensively, of course, we've taken out Osama bin Laden and we've eliminated a lot of al-Qaeda sanctuaries, but it has turned into a global movement. So on the hard power side, I'd say we've had some success, but on the soft power side, we need to do a lot more to undermine this ideology of Islamic extremism. We did that against the ideology of communism, but it took several decades. I want to see things like girls' education, women's empowerment, things that go to the heart of this extremist ideology that's bastardized Islam. And it's that longer term strategy where I think we could do a lot more, and that's how we're going to win in the long run. But unfortunately, that's going to take quite some time. And we're seeing with Afghanistan in particular, but in other places, that this is now becoming a generational war. My soldiers in the early stages of Afghanistan are now sending their children off to this effort. And I think, you know, we're going to continue to need to see national leadership going to take to win this long war.
I suppose the American population of the 1940s could never imagine that the Germans and the Japanese would one day be our best friends. So it is possible to defeat an ideology and change those who adhere to it.
You know, that's right, but it takes time. And I think it takes a concerted effort in a different way. Again, you know, on the hard power side, we have to keep up the pressure. We cannot ever put the gloves back on. And those, you know, those folks that have been radicalized already need to be either killed or captured. I'm sorry to be that blunt. But on the soft power side, it's the next generation that I think about. It's education, it's economic empowerment. You know, it is getting to those folks that have yet to be radicalized, and that's where we could do more. But to your analogy, right, you know, I don't think Ike or Truman could have predicted that we would be in South Korea for 60, 70 years. And I was proud to see President Trump take the approach that he did in Afghanistan, that we can't fight this war based on timelines. We can't fight this war based on political imperatives. We have to base it on conditions on the ground, and when the threat the United States recedes, and when our allies, in this case the Afghans, are able to stand up on their own.
The president has arrived at the Pentagon. He will be observing a moment of silence there shortly, along with the First Lady. Colonel, you mentioned economic empowerment. Aside from the staggering military costs of our engagement in Afghanistan, there's been an awful lot of aid money and reconstruction money poured into that country, and a lot of observers say it's not accomplishing anything. Do you see it that way, or are we getting good bang for our taxpayer buck there?
Well, listen, John, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that we could have done better and should do better going forward. But on the other hand, you know, when we started in that country, girls were not allowed to go to school. Now we have millions going to school. You know, we have had achievements across the board in the sense of there was no, you know, people were riding bicycles in downtown Kabul. Now you have traffic jams. People's lives have improved. The people of that country do not want a return of the Taliban, and in the wake of their return, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But on the other hand, you know, again, there's things that we could do better. At this point, I think the strategy is correct to focus on supporting the Afghan army, They are fighting a hard fight, but they need our support in terms of air support, medevac, intelligence and other enablers that only the United States can support. And I think while we can say that a lot has been wasted, on the other hand, if we just pull out and we allow the Taliban to resurge, Al-Qaeda and ISIS will surge in their wake and they will threaten the United States again.
We're watching now on screen as the president is taking part in the wreath laying at the Pentagon. Let's listen in for a moment there. The president and First Lady there at the Pentagon taking part in the ceremonies that will continue. We will hear from the president at some point. Colonel, while we still have you, talking about the situation in Afghanistan, talk to us about Pakistan, how critical that is as, you know, again, with what John mentioned, there's a lot of aid that's flowed into that country, and yet a lot of people feel like it's not a reliable ally when it comes to making sure that there aren't terrorist havens there. That the Taliban is still very active and really doesn't seem super motivated to get to the negotiating table.
Well, that's a great point. And, you know, I tell people all the time, look, Iraq has been incredibly tough for us. Population there, about 25 million. Population in Afghanistan, about 30 million. Population in Pakistan, over 200 million, 10 times the size of Iraq, with a nuclear arsenal. And as Afghanistan goes, if it completely destabilizes in the wake of an American withdrawal, Pakistan will go as well. And now we're talking a nuclear arsenal. So, you know, that's what's at stake. In terms of our policy, I do believe we must take a much harder line. Pakistan must back away from using extremism as a tool of its foreign policy and to try to control the region. And while we have tried for years, and I was part of this when I served in the White House, to offer carrots, I think now it is, you know, that there still needs to be a mix. We do not want to make Pakistan our enemy, but there needs to be, there still needs to be some carrots, but we need to bring out the sticks.
Well, just weeks ago, as the president was considering his Afghanistan strategy and just ahead of what has been identified as additional troops, U.S. troops heading in there, I mean, the Taliban issued a statement saying, don't send a troop surge. It's not going to go well for you. We'll discuss that a little bit more, but let's listen in now to Ground Zero, another moment of remembrance there.
Marking in Manhattan as well as at the Pentagon the moment the Pentagon was struck by the aircraft.
And now continuing the reading of the names in Manhattan, which takes quite a long time when you're talking about nearly 3,000 innocent people who lost their lives that day. These are family members and friends who come to the podium to speak the names of those lost and to share their memories. And as you watch on the other side of the screen as the president and first lady head to the dais there in the Pentagon for remembrances. Colonel, we still have you. And quickly, I wanted to ask you about the Taliban just boldly saying, hey, if you're considering a surge to the president, don't do it. It's not going to work. And we're not in any place that we are coming to the negotiating table. I mean, they were defiant.
Well, the Taliban right now think they're winning. And in many areas in parts of Afghanistan, they are. They've taken more territory than they had since 9/11. And I think that's frankly been a result of America telling the world over the last 8 years that we're leaving, we're leaving, we're leaving. But Shannon, I just want to also say, in terms of the ceremony, you know, we're recognizing our fallen today. We're recognizing the first responders and our military members. But I also want to recognize those in our intelligence community and the diplomats that don't get the recognition.
Colonel, the national anthem underway now at the Pentagon.
And the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Air Force Chief of Chaplains, Major General Don D. Costin.
So many stories, Shannon, of heroism came out of the events at the Pentagon. And, you know, in so many ways, though this was the most awful terrorism attack that our country has ever suffered, I like to think that in many ways it was not successful in that, you know, the section of the Pentagon that was attacked on that particular day was under renovation. There were a lot of offices that should have been filled that day that were not. There were a lot of seats on that plane that should have been filled that day that were not. It, as horrible as it was not as bad as it could have been.
And I recently went down and visited the 9/11 memorial, which I know you've done a special down there and spent a lot of time. And it's interesting, as we've heard this morning from these family members, that they do continue collection there. And it's an active collection site. And with the advances in technology, they continue to identify more and more remains. And Eric Shawn spoke earlier about this case just a few weeks ago of being able to identify remains there. And a family said, you know what, we want him to stay there with his friends, with his people that he perished with, and to be at this site they now consider to be hallowed ground. And for so many families, that is the decision they make. You're looking live here as the vice president and his wife Karen arrive in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, of course. That is one of the most inspirational parts of the day, knowing the folks on that plane who fought to make sure it did not go down in the heart of Washington, John.
The Flight 93 National Memorial near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. If you have not made your way there yet, it is sobering, touching. I can't think of the words to describe the place, but yes, those heroes on board Flight 93 who knew that they were being used as a flying bomb, essentially, fought back against the hijackers, took that plane down rather than let it be used as the missile that it was intended to be against probably the United States Capitol building, possibly the White House.
And you look at the photos that day and the images here in New York of people running through the streets, the same there in Washington, people evacuating the Capitol, the White House, not knowing what was coming next. And if you think back to that day, there was so much in flux. Obviously, we have 2020 hindsight now, but that day, with so many planes in the air, not knowing where they were headed, not knowing which ones had evil terrorist actors on board versus those who were just trying to get people to safety. We've learned so much in the years, the 16 years since then, and now we look live at the Pentagon as we will hear from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, and also the Defense Secretary now, General James Mattis, and eventually the President as well.
Distinguished guests, and most importantly, to the family and friends of the fallen, and to those gathered here who survived the attack on the Pentagon, good morning. It's an honor to join you as we pause to reflect all those who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. At this ceremony, we're particularly mindful of the 184 who died here in the halls of the Pentagon and aboard Flight 77. 16 years ago, when terrorists attacked the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, and as they attempted other attacks in Washington, D.C., they did so with a sense of purpose. They were attacking symbols that reflect our way of life and our values. Terrorists believed that these attacks would shake our commitment to those values. And as President Bush said hours after the attacks, the terrorists thought they could frighten us into chaos and retreat. But they were wrong. Instead of retreat, the tragedy of 9/11 produced in us an unyielding resolve. Instead of hopelessness, our mourning turned into action. And we have strengthened our commitment to the idea that the freedom of many should never be endangered by the hatred of a few. So this morning, as we recall the events of 9/11, it's appropriate for those of us still serving to remember and honor those who died, those who continue suffering from injuries, and those left behind. But if we truly want to honor those remembered today, each of us will walk away from this ceremony with a renewed sense of commitment to our values and the cause of freedom. Each of us will walk away from this simple ceremony reminded that the war is not over and that further sacrifice will be required. And each of us will walk away with resolve to strengthen our personal commitment to protect our family, friends, and fellow citizens from another 9/11. It's now my privilege to introduce someone who has spent his life demonstrating personal commitment to protecting our values and our way of life, our Secretary of Defense, the Honorable James Mattis.
Well, thank you, General Dunford. Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, our First Lady, fellow secretaries of the President's Cabinet, distinguished guests, first responders, ladies and gentlemen, and a special heartfelt welcome to the 306 family members gathered to remember their loved ones lost 16 years ago today. We are here to honor those 2,977 lives claimed by the brutal attacks of September 11th, 2001. Men and women who woke that day never anticipating an attack on their place of work or against this country. Innocents who hailed from 90 nations and all walks of life. Attackers perpetrating murder that fateful day. But heroism and compassion were boundless on 9/11. Patriots from all backgrounds and all walks of life responded with speed, with courage, and with compassion. In the aftermath of the attack, our service members, our nation, rallied together as one. For while we had never asked for this fight, we are steadfastly committed to seeing it through, as President Trump has made abundantly clear. And with no more temporizing, as our example of leadership galvanizes other nations to stand united against this threat to all humankind. Maniacs disguised in false religious garb thought by hurting us they could scare us that day. But we, Americans, are not made of cotton candy. We are not seaweed drifting in the current. We are not intimidated by our enemies, and Mr. President, your military does not scare. Our nation's troops today are worthy successors of our Revolutionary Army at Valley Forge, worthy successors of our valiant sailors at Midway and our Marines at Bloody Iwo Jima, and of our Air Force pilots patrolling Migda Alley. Men and women of your armed forces, America, having signed a blank check to the protection of the American people and to the defense of our Constitution, a check payable with their very lives, your military stands ready and confident to defend this country, this experiment in democracy. And we will continue to do so using all means necessary and as long as necessary. So today we remember the loss of so many in New York City, in a somber field in Pennsylvania, and here in this very building behind me, and in many battles since, and some of those battles are still raging. As former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld observed, on 9/11 every year, we again are mindful and resolute that their deaths, like their lives, shall have meaning. And that is in how we carry forward our responsibility to protect America. To the families of those who perished, the loss you have endured drives us in our mission today and every day. And it's in that spirit, ladies and gentlemen, that it's my honor to introduce our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Thank you, General. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you, Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, members of the cabinet, members of the armed forces, first responders, and most importantly, to the families and to the survivors. It's an honor to join you on this very, very solemn location. This is an occasion that is extraordinary, and it'll always be extraordinary. Before we begin, I'd like to send our nation's prayers to everyone in the path of Hurricanes Irma and to everyone suffering through the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. These are storms of catastrophic severity, and we're marshaling the full resources of the federal government to help our fellow Americans in Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and all of those wonderful places and states in harm's way. When Americans are in need, Americans pull together, and we are one country. And when we face hardship, we emerge closer, stronger, and more determined than ever. We're gathered here today to remember a morning that started very much like this one. Parents dropped off their children at school. Travelers stood in line at airports and getting ready to board flights. Here at the Pentagon and at offices all across the country, people began their early meetings. Then our whole world changed. America was under attack, first at the World Trade Center, then here at the Pentagon, and then in Pennsylvania. The horror and anguish of that dark day were seared into our national memory forever. It was the worst attack on our country since Pearl Harbor, and even worse because this was an attack on civilians, innocent men, women, and children whose lives were taken so needlessly. For the families with us on this anniversary, we know that not a single day goes by when you don't think about the loved one stolen from your life. Today, our entire nation grieves with you, and with every family of those 2,977 innocent souls who were murdered by terrorists 16 years ago. Each family here today represents a son or daughter, a sister or brother, a mother or father who was taken from you on that terrible, terrible day. But no force on earth can ever take away your memories, diminish your love, or break your will to endure and carry on and go forward. Though we can never erase your pain or bring back those you lost, we can honor their sacrifice by pledging our resolve to do whatever we must to keep our people safe. On that day, not only did the world change, but we all changed. Our eyes were opened to the depths of the evil we face. But in that hour of darkness, we also came together with renewed purpose. Our differences never looked so small. Our common bonds never felt so strong. The sacrifice grounds on which we stand today are a monument to our national unity and to our strength. For more than 7 decades, the Pentagon has stood as a global symbol of American might, not only because of the great power contained within these halls, but because of the incredible character of the people who fill them. They secure our freedom, they defend our flag, and they support our courageous troops all around the world. Among the 184 brave Americans who perished on these grounds were young enlisted service members, dedicated civil servants who had worked here for decades, and veterans who served our nation in Korea, in Vietnam, and in the Middle East. All of them loved this country and pledged their very lives to protect it. That September morning, each of those brave Americans died as they had lived, as heroes, doing their duty and protecting us and our country. We mourn them, we honor them, and we pledge to never, ever forget them. We also remember and cherish the lives of the beloved Americans who boarded Flight 77 at Dulles Airport that morning. Every one of them had a family, a story, and beautiful dreams. Each of them had people they loved and who loved them back. And they all left behind a deep emptiness that their warmth and grace once filled so fully and so beautifully. The living, breathing soul of America wept with grief for every life taken on that day. We shed our tears in their memory, pledged our devotion in their honor, and turned our sorrow into an unstoppable resolve to achieve justice in their name. The terrorists who attacked us thought they could incite fear and weaken our spirit. But America cannot be intimidated, and those who try will soon join the long list of vanquished enemies who dare to test our mettle. In the years after September 11th, more than 5 million young men and women have joined the ranks of our great military to defend our country against barbaric forces of evil and destruction. American forces are relentlessly pursuing and destroying the enemy's all civilized people, ensuring, and these are horrible, horrible enemies, enemies like we've never seen before. But we're ensuring that they never again have a safe haven to launch attacks against our country. We are making plain to these savage killers that there is no dark corner beyond our reach, no sanctuary beyond our grasp, and nowhere to hide anywhere on this very large earth. Since 9/11, nearly 7,000 service members have given their lives fighting terrorists around the globe. Some of them rest just beyond this fence, in the shrine to our nation's heroes, on the grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. They came from all backgrounds, all races, all faiths, but they were all there to dedicate their lives, and they defend our one great American flag. They and every person who puts on the uniform has the love and gratitude of our entire nation. Today, as we stand on this hallowed ground, we are reminded of the timeless truth that when America is united, no force on earth can break us apart. No force. On the morning of 9/11, Pentagon police officer Isaac Hupel and a special person was one of the many heroes whose love for his fellow Americans knew no bounds. He was a mile away when he got the call over his radio that a plane had crashed into the Pentagon. He sped to the scene and raced into smoke and fire. Few people would have done it. He ducked under live electrical wires and trudged through puddles of jet fuel, only steps away from sparks and from vicious flame. In the pitch black, he began calling out people in need of help. Isaac heard faint voices, and he wanted to answer those faint voices. One by one, he carried people out of the burning rubble. He kept going back into the smoldering darkness, calling out to anyone who could hear, anyone who was alive. He saved as many as 20 people who had followed his voice. He carried 8 himself. For nearly 36 hours, Isaac kept on saving lives, serving our nation, and protecting our safety in our honor and our hour of need. And today, Isaac continues to do exactly that. Isaac still works at the Pentagon, now as a sergeant. He's on duty right now, and he's joined us here today for the ceremony. And this morning, all of us and all of America thank Isaac for his service. Where is Isaac? Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you. To Isaac and to every first responder and survivor of the attack you carry on the legacy of the friends you lost, you keep alive the memory of those who perish, and you make America proud. Very, very proud. To the family members with us today, I know that it's with a pained and heavy heart that you come back to this place. But by doing so, by choosing to persevere through the grief, the sorrow, you honor your heroes. You renew our courage, and you strengthen all of us. You really do. You strengthen all of us. Here on the west side of the Pentagon, terrorists tried to break our resolve. Not going to happen. But where they left a mark, with fire and rubble, Americans defiantly raised the stars and stripes, our beautiful flag that for more than 2 centuries has graced our ships, flown in our skies, and led our brave heroes to victory after victory in battle. The flag that binds us all together as Americans, who cherish our values and protect our way of life. The flag that reminds us today of who we are, what we stand for, and why we fight. Woven into that beautiful flag is the story of our resolve. We have overcome every challenge, every single challenge, every one of them. We've triumphed over every evil and remained united as one nation under God. America does not bend. We do not waver, and we will never, ever yield. So here at this memorial, with hearts both sad and determined, we honor every hero who keeps us safe and free, and we pledge to work together, to fight together, and to overcome together every enemy and obstacle that's ever in our path. Our values will endure. Our people will thrive. Our nation will prevail, and the memory of our loved ones will never, ever die. Thank you. May God bless you. May God forever bless the great United States of America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
The first remarks from President Trump as Commander-in-Chief at the Pentagon Memorial, honoring those who gave their lives on 9/11/2001.
And as he was speaking, you may have heard the bell tolling as we were also taking you live to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, 10:03 Eastern Time, marking the moment that Flight 93 went down there in what most believe was absolutely an act of heroism. The hijackers having taken control of that plane. People on board getting word about what had happened at the Pentagon and in New York and deciding that they would not let that plane get to its intended target. Vice President Pence there in Shanksville at that hallowed ground where they are remembering the heroes of Flight 93.
184 people, primarily members of the service, but civilians as well, died at the Pentagon. Some eloquent words there, I thought, in particular from the Defense Secretary Mattis, who said, "We never asked for this fight, but we are steadfastly committed to seeing it through." And then he went on and talked about what the terrorists thought they would accomplish by striking at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. He said, "We are not cotton candy. Mr. President, your military doesn't scare."
And the president then following up in his remarks saying, when America is united, no force can break us apart. Joining us now, Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. And Brit, certainly that is a message that could be used today and much beyond about this country and the moments that do bring us together.
It certainly did bring us together at that time, Shannon. And in fact, I spent much of that day, that fateful day, in this very studio where I'm coming to you from now. And hearing John Scott's voice in my ear as he anchors with you this morning is a similar reminder of what that day was like. John, of course, handled so much of the duty, the anchor duty that day, and what an astonishing moment it was. And it was one of those days, I think you'll both agree, that once what was happening became clear, that this was no accident, that this was an attack. We knew that things were not going to be the same, and they never have been, and they still are not. We've made an amazing recovery as a nation from that. But as General Mattis and the President made clear, the struggle against this scourge still goes on. And we think about it every day, and it affects our lives, our budgets, our defense posture, our diplomacy every single day.
There are seniors in high school, Britt, who don't really remember that day 16 years ago today. And yet, New York is a city of museums. You've got the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You've got the Museum of Modern Art. And one of the most visited museums in this country, or in this city, is the 9/11 Memorial Museum. People flock there to remember and to learn. I think it's absolutely astounding.
Yeah, and it's probably, I think about these commemorations that we have every year of that event, and we're 16 years on now, and we're in the middle of a hugely major news story about the storm that's hit Florida, and now it looks like it's going to hit a lot of other places as well. But I think it's well to turn away from that, to note this day, which, as we've talked about, still affects us so much, and about which it's good to give young people who weren't alive then a chance to learn about it, an opportunity to pause and think about that day, because it was a turning point in the nation's history and whose consequences are still being felt.
Hey, Britt, did you think on that day, as you watched this unfold across the country, across the eastern seaboard, that we'd be here 16 years later still fighting this war in Afghanistan, still trying to get a handle on this, as so many of these groups have now metastasized? We see what some call lone wolf actors who act simply because they are inspired by these groups and create a lot of damage without ever being formally linked to this terrorist apparatus.
Well, I didn't think it was going to be over soon or quickly, that this foe and the ideology that inspires it would be vanquished in a short period of time. It looked like a much longer struggle. And on that day, of course, Shannon, as I'm sure you all remember, we could not know that further attacks of similar magnitude would not soon follow. And that, of course, we lived in fear of that, every day for weeks thereafter. And it is a striking fact and an accomplishment that no such attack of this magnitude has struck our mainland since then. And we've had terrorist attacks, to be sure, and they're terrifying, and they're happening still around the world, but nothing on that scale. And you know perfectly well that it's been attempted. We know that. So it's a tribute to the response that has come from this country that we've been able to ward off a further attack. But you know that enemies are out there plotting and hoping they can pull the same thing off, which they've so far failed to do since 9/11/2001.
It was early in the Bush 43 administration this attack took place. It was he was supposed to be the education president, and he was at an education event when the attacks took place. It certainly shaped his administration, that of his successor, Barack Obama, and now you have President Trump making remarks at the president. Your thoughts on all of that? Well,
I remember thinking at the time, wondering how President Bush would respond to that. And it utterly changed his presidency, utterly. It affected him and his vice president perhaps even more profoundly. And those two men pursued this enemy with extraordinary and intense diligence. And it completely reshaped his presidency. And and I think, in fact, the effectiveness of his response is what led to his reelection in 2004 more than anything else. He was seen as a wartime president who'd done, at least to that point, a pretty good job. And, of course, was the saga of Iraq and all the controversy that surrounded that and all the misgivings that we have all come to have about whether that was necessary. This was a big turning point. There's no question about that. And, we're still feeling it to this day, as you say.
Rick Hume, it's good to have you on and share your insights with us. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
That was 16 years ago this hour. It's easy to forget how it all happened, but we will never forget what happened.
And we've had two presidents since then, President Obama for 8 years. This will be the first time we see our president, a New Yorker by birth, who lived through this, as we all did in Midtown Manhattan. And he'll come out and offer his moment of silence with the First Lady.
He and the First Lady, yes, will also be at the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial, where they will remember all of the victims, leading that moment of silence. You're looking live at the White House right now.
And at some point later today, we'll get all the names of those who lost their lives, 2,996.
The President and the First Lady should come out of the South Portico in the next few seconds to mark 8:46, 16 years ago, when American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower. This will be the first of 6 moments of silence. After we observe the moment of silence, we will take you to Ground Zero for the traditional reading of the names.
Amatuccio.
Paul W. Ambrose.
Christopher Charles Amoroso.
Craig Scott Amundsen.
Kazuhiro Anai.
Calixto Anaya Jr.
Joseph P. Anchandia.
Kermit Charles Anderson.
Yvette Constance Anderson.
John Jack Andriacchio.
Michael Rourke Andrews.
Jean Ann Andrucki.
Sue Nia Ang.
Joseph Angelini Sr.,
Joseph John Angelini Jr.,
David Lawrence Angel,
Mary Lynn Edwards Angel,
Laura Angeletta,
Doreen J. Angersani,
Lorraine Antigua,
Sama David Aoyama,
and my father, Kevin James Murphy. I love you very much, Dad, and I know you're looking down at me with a big, big smile on your face today. I love you.
and my uncle and my hero, New York City firefighter and United States Marine, Matthew David Garvey. We love and miss you, Uncle Matt.
Peter Paul Apollo,
Faustino Apostol Jr.,
Frank Thomas Aquilino,
Patrick Michael Anyos,
David Gregory Arache,
Michael George Arjinsky,
Louis Arena,
Barbara Jean Arstegui,
Adam P. Arias,
Michael J. Armstrong,
Jack Charles Aaron,
Joshua Todd Aaron,
Richard Avery Arano,
Myra Joy Aronson,
Japhet Jesse Arie,
Carl Francis Asaro,
Michael A. Asiak,
Michael Edward Asher,
Janice Marie Ashley,
Thomas J. Ashton,
Manuel O. Asentimbe,
Greg A. Atlas,
Gerald Thomas Atwood,
James Otterfred,
Louis
Gordon M. Amos Jr.,
Edelamero Abad,
Marie Rose Abad,
Andrew Anthony Abate,
Vincent Paul Abate,
Lawrence Christopher Abel,
Alana Abraham,
William F. Abramson,
Richard Anthony Aceto,
Heinrich Bernard Ackerman,
Paul Aquaviva,
Christian Adams,
Donald Leroy Adams,
Patrick Adams,
Shannon Lewis Adams,
Stephen George Adams,
Ignatius Udo
F. Aversano Jr.,
Ezra Avidas,
Sandy Ayala,
Arlene T. Babiquitas,
Eustace R. Bacchus,
John J. Badagliaca,
Jane Ellen Basler,
Robert J. Bearwalter,
Andrew J. Bailey,
Greg T. Bailey,
Garnet Ace Bailey,
Tatiana Bakalinskaya,
Michael S. Bashk,
Sharon M. Malcolm,
Michael Andrew Bain.
Catherine Bantis.
And my brother, Joseph Michael Giacconi.
And
His family, his friends will never forget. I come here every year for 16 years to make sure I hear his name so that I can honor him and make sure that he will never be forgotten.
And my grandfather, Howard Selwyn.
Gerard Batiste.
Walter Barron.
Gerard A. Barbera.
Paul Vincent Barbaro.
James William Barbella.
Victor Daniel Barbosa.
Christine Joanna Barbuda.
Colleen Ann Barco.
David Michael Barclay.
Matthew Barnes.
Melissa Rose Barnes.
Sheila Patricia Barnes.
Evan J. Barone.
Renee Barrett Arjun.
Arthur Thaddeus Barry.
Diane G. Barry.
Maurice Vincent Barry.
Scott D. Bart.
Carlton W. Bartels.
Guy Barsby.
Ina B. Basina.
Alicia Christine Burton Bajmajan.
I'm sorry. Kenneth William Basnicki.
Danga.
Christy A. Adamo.
Terrence Edward Adderley Jr.
Sophia B. Addo.
Lee Adler.
Daniel Thomas Aflito.
Emmanuel Akwazi Afwakwa.
Alak Agrawal.
Mukul Kumar Agarwala.
Joseph Agnello.
David Scott Agnes.
Joao Alberto da Frenska Aguilera Jr.
Brian G. Ahern.
Jeremiah Joseph Ahern.
Joanne Marie Adiolas.
Shabir Ahmed.
Terrence Andre Aiken.
Godwin O. Ajala.
Trudy Alagero.
Andrew Alamino.
Margaret Ann Alario.
Gary M. Abero.
John Leslie Albert.
Peter Craig Alderman.
And my uncle, Charles William Garbarini.
My brother-in-law, Sal Edward Terry Jr. May you rest in peace. Your sister Faith still misses you to this date. You've been a guiding light and a hero always to this date. Thank you very much.
Jacqueline Delane Aldridge Frederick.
David D. Alger.
Ernest Ali Kakos.
Edward L. Allegretto.
Eric Allen.
Joseph Ryan Allen.
Richard Dennis Allen.
Richard L. Allen.
Christopher E. Allingham.
Anna S. W. Allison.
Janet Marie Alonso.
Anthony Alvarado.
Antonio Javier Alvarez.
Victoria Alvarez Brito.
Telmo E. Alvear.
Cesar Amaranto Alviar.
Tariq Amanula.
Angelo Amaranto.
James M. Amato.
Joseph